Jenny Randall, strange name. Nice to see you again, Jenny. We've had loads of calls. The thing about them is that what you're saying is not that everybody who sees an unidentified flying object has necessarily seen a spaceship or someone. By far the majority of them, what, 95%, are very quickly identified as being something quite normal.
Yes.
What you're interested in is the 5% which aren't.
Exactly, and there are lots of different things too. I mean, even of those, we're not saying that they're all, or even any of them, are spaceships. They're just phenomena that we have to try and figure out what they are.
Which are very hard to explain. All right. Well, let's get on to Keith. He's our first caller. He's calling from Sussex. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, this is about something which happened to you when you were a child, yes?
That's correct, yes.
How old were you, Keith?
I was 9 years old.
Right, go on then. Tell us what happened.
I was raised on a farm and in Lancashire, and I was used to walk home from school. The farm was a long way from any other houses, and I'm on my way home from school, and I don't remember anything happening, but my mother says that I was a good hour late. And so what happened was she came down to find out where I was, and I was still walking home, and she found me looking up and stopped on the drive and got out of the car and looked up with me, and there were 3 UFOs flying above me.
What do you mean UFOs? What do they look like?
There were 3 circular objects flying in triangular formation.
Yeah. So you had no memories at that point, but I think you said that you had some very vivid dreams in the years after. What kind of dreams?
Well, later on, a couple of years later, I started getting interested in mechanics through my father, and getting involved in the internal parts of engines. I started to have strange dreams of graphic engine rooms and...
strange-looking engine rooms? I mean, things that are not sort of normally found in engine rooms?
Oh, that's correct, yes. Definitely not of this world type of mechanics. Extremely graphics. So what I started to do was keep a diary by my bed, and when I'd wake up in the middle of the night, I would draw and write down what I'd seen.
So what he's saying is he's surmising that he was abducted by aliens, basically shown around a spaceship and returned back home in a time warp. Yes. Very common sort of belief that some people have that's happened to them. What do you think?
It is. Keith, did you see any figures at all in these dreams?
No, I have no recall of any beings.
So what is it that convinces you that it has to be an alien contact that you've gone through?
Well, because I now have a theoretical, complete graphic drawing of an intermittent internal thrust generator.
Information that you couldn't have got normally. This is an interesting situation that we do find again and again, that people appear to believe that they've had information like this planted into their minds. And I've investigated cases like this in Eastern Europe, Australia, America, and they're always the same. There's an incredible consistency about them. I wish I could say that there was a simple psychological explanation for these things, but unfortunately every psychologist I've worked with who's been involved has failed to find one. We're really dealing with something which there doesn't seem to be an immediately obvious answer to.
What are the common factors in all these stories then?
When they're told information, they usually believe that there's a long-term surveillance, some sort of communication with some entities. They don't automatically assume they come from outer space. That's a kind of imposition that we place on from outside. We think in UFOs in terms of little green men and spaceships, but it's not necessarily true. And that gradually everybody will realize the truth about this, because so many people have gone through these experiences. It's amazing. Last year a big opinion poll survey was carried out. We predicted in advance that we'd find that maybe 1 out of every 10,000 people would think they'd had an abduction experience. It turned out from this survey of 6,000 people that approximately 1.25 million people in Britain think they have. That's astonishing.
Well, presumably the kind of, I mean, if what happened to Keith really did happen, presumably the kind of, if you like, the science fiction explanation for it would be that he now has access to information of a kind of engineering detail which is from another planet, and
yes,
that eventually he will actually pass that information on to the rest of us?
Unfortunately, the hard information that we can actually use is very rare. There have been a few claims for cures for cancer and things like that which have been implanted into people, but they're so complicated we can't really understand them. But it doesn't really matter what this experience is, whether it is some kind of bizarre global psychosis or whether it really is an alien contact. The undeniable fact is that something is going on which needs to be taken seriously enough to figure out what it is.
Okay, Keith, well, thank you very much indeed, indeed for calling with that. Strange but true, very interesting. Nick's on the line now, calling from Devon. Now, Nick, you're a policeman.
That's correct, yes.
And you saw something as recently as March.
That's correct, yes.
Right, do tell us about it.
Yes, it was the early hours of the 31st of March this year. I was on night duty. I was with a colleague, in a car in North Devon. We saw two very bright lights, or balls of light, travelling towards us off the Bristol Channel, coming inland.
What, low down or high up?
Well, it's difficult to say the height. Well below the level of the stars, I would guess it's sort of several thousands of feet, about the height of a jet aircraft, perhaps. Yeah. Travelling parallel together, and as they came, we stopped the car, turned the engine off, and it was totally silent. It came right over the top of us. The two balls of light seemed to be emitting some sort of trail behind them, and there was a sort of smaller trail between them. It was like a triangular formation set midway between the two balls of light. It was a sort of a thinner trail. Came right over the top of us. They didn't seem to be joined in any way, because I could see clearly the stars between them. And the thing about it all was that it was totally silent. There didn't seem to be any engine noise or anything associated with it.
And did they disappear over the other horizon?
It came directly off the channel, travelling south, and went right over the top of us, and then disappeared behind us. It was obliterated by a cloud as it travelled south.
Nick, you weren't the only person who saw it.
No, that's correct. We reported it, or my colleague reported it over the radio, and immediately there was a response from several other patrols along the coast, people that I know, that reported seeing the same thing, and as did other colleagues inland.
So it must have been quite high if people could see it simultaneously along a wide stretch of the coast.
Yes, it was obviously high, but it's difficult to say what height.
In fact, Nick, it was seen also from Southern Ireland, where a military transport plane was nearly hit by this thing as it flew across the sky. Also from South Wales and northern France, so it was extremely high.
So you know about this story?
We've been working on this case. Our investigator down in Devon and Cornwall, Doug Cooper, has actually talked to about 20 police officers like Nick who've seen this thing at the same time, 1:13 a.m. on the 31st of March. And we've been working quite closely with the Ministry of Defence on this, who've also received lots of calls through their bases and Coast Guard stations too.
So what's your assessment? What could it have been?
Well, we know now that on that night, at that time, a Soviet booster satellite, Cosmos 2238, re-entered the atmosphere over the Atlantic and burnt up spectacularly as it came in. And that seems to have been responsible for a lot of what was seen that night. But as often happens when you get spectacular sightings like this, it trolls in other cases, which probably wouldn't have been reported otherwise, because people get the encouragement to come forward because they think others have seen the same thing. And there are still some puzzles, and the MOD and ourselves have mutually agreed that there are some fascinating cases that night which still have to be resolved.
Well, what are the puzzles?
They do often involve the two lights, but also a shape variously described as like a catamaran, or two Concords side by side is another description from some CID police officers who run a stakeout operation in Devon and saw this thing fly right over them.
And is that not compatible with the entry at this, whatever it was?
No,
Soviet?
the time differences were the problem, that we know exactly when the re-entry occurred, and most of the sightings fit in exactly with that, but there are these little anomalies in time, maybe half an hour or an hour later.
So just to scratch Nick's itch, did he, from what you hear, do you think he saw the re-entry of the old space?
It sounds very probable, because most of the sightings were.
And it would explain the lack of noise, wouldn't it,
nevertheless,
as well?
it was a spectacular thing to see. They're rare, and they're UFOs in every sense of that word, because the UFO stands for unidentified flying object.
Yeah, but it's nicer to think there was an alien inside.
Oh, that's the danger, isn't it?
I know,
that's the danger.
You start convincing yourself.
Nice one, Nick.
More. Yes, well, thank you very much for that call, Nick. That was very interesting, and as I say, Jenny knows all about it. Paul is on the line now from Leeds. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Right, a sceptic is among us, yes?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Go on. You've got a PhD in astrophysics.
I'm studying for one at the moment.
You're studying for one, right, and so you should know what you're talking about. Go on, give us your opinion.
Well, it's just I can't see why they've never been spotted by sort of, we've got, you know, the civil aviation people or the military aircraft people. They've never, you know, spotted anything.
You're talking here not about strange, because obviously there are strange things in the sky which eventually have an explanation like the last one. You're talking about people who are convinced that some of these things come from another planet.
Yeah.
Right, and you don't believe that at all?
It just sounds silly, doesn't it, really?
What do you mean, they'd come all these millions of miles just to sort of...
Well, I mean, as well, would they be, you know, where could they live? I mean, like, we can see, like, millions of miles away. I mean, the speeds they'd have to travel is just impossible. That they could go, you know, from there.
But Paul, it may not be impossible to them, you see. I mean, they are not like us.
There's two answers to the questions that Paul have posed there, really. The first one about them being tracked on radar. It isn't true, in fact, that they never have been. A lot of people in this country don't realise that, but in 1991, there were 5 separate incidents separated by about 12 weeks where British civilian airliners with passengers on board, up to 200 in one case, actually had close encounters with objects, at least 2 of which were tracked on radar by Heathrow or the London Air Traffic Control Centre.
But could they not be advanced aircraft? I mean, for example, you take the American stealth bomber, which we're now all very familiar with as a shape, but 10 years ago, if I'd seen a stealth bomber flying alongside me on a Boeing 707, I would have thought that's got to come from outer space. That isn't a thing I've seen before.
There have been some sightings where advanced aircraft have been involved, but if the Americans are flying stealth bombers in our passenger airlines at about 10,000 feet in and around the southern counties of England, then we really ought to know about it, because sooner or later there's going to be a bit of a disaster. They deny it. I think the Ministry of Defence are happy that they deny it. I've got written confirmation from both the MOD and the Civil Aviation Authority about these incidents, that they are, quote, in their definition, unidentified flying objects. They checked every source possible and they couldn't find an answer for them. They don't appear to be that in these cases. The second part of the question, though, was why would they come here? That presumes, first of all, of course, that they're aliens and that they are coming here, which is an assumption that many of us who research UFOs don't make. But even if that assumption is valid, it's quite possible that they are covertly observing us and don't want to actually openly land. If we were to go into the jungle and study lions and tigers, the last thing we'd do is go up and introduce ourselves, shake their hands, and probably get eaten as a result.
But is there, I mean, I know you have a cool and scientific approach to this, and you hope an objective one, but is there a tiny bit of you which actually really hopes that a lot of these things are aliens checking us out?
I guess it's the thing which drives everybody who's interested in the UFO subject along, to try to find that little spark of evidence which proves that there's something fantastic out there, that we really aren't alone in the universe. It's a terrible thing to think that there is nobody out there who's better than us, who's actually solved the problems that we've got.
But on the other hand, I don't like the thought of being used as some kind of experimental kind of ground for them to come and look at us and check us out, do you?
The abduction experiences are horrible. They really are, and it is frightening to think that they may well be true. The sad thing is, though, that they are so consistent that it's hard to believe there's not some substance to them.
Well, you've made us all very paranoid, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks.
I mean, I've got sympathy with Paul, but I mean, I'm not paranoid. I think it's quite nice. I'd quite like to meet an alien. Right, talking of things not of this world, thanks very much indeed, Jenny. Musician Jean-Michel Jarre is famous for huge space-age concerts like this one.
Okay, before I pick up on that, just to tell, if you want to know more about Jenny's ideas, it's in her new book, UFOs and How to See Them.